The Women Airforce Service Pilots was a paramilitary aviation organization, the WASP's predecessors. The Women's Flying Training Detachment and the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron organized separately in September 1942. They were the pioneering organizations of civilian female pilots, employed to fly military aircraft under the direction of the United States Army Air Forces during World War II. The WFTD and WAFS were merged on August 5, 1943, to create the paramilitary WASP organization. The female pilots of the WASP ended up numbering 1,074, each freeing a male pilot for combat service and duties. They flew over 60 million miles in every type of military aircraft. The WASP was granted veteran status in 1977 and given the Congressional Gold Medal in 2009. Over 25,000 women applied. However, only 1,074 were accepted into the WASPs. The accepted women all had prior experience and pilots' licenses. Of those accepted, the majority were white. Aside from white women, the WASP had 2 Mexican-American women, 2 Chinese-American women, and 1 Native American woman. Due to the existing climate of racial discrimination, the only African-American applicant was asked to withdraw her application. Creation of the WASP. By the summer of 1941, Florida native Jackie Cochran and test pilot Nancy Harkness Love had independently submitted proposals to the U.S. Army Air Forces to use women pilots in non-combat missions after the outbreak of World War II in Europe. The motivation was to free male pilots for combat roles by employing qualified female pilots to ferry aircraft from factories to military bases, and to tow drones and aerial targets. Prior to Pearl Harbor, General Henry H. Hap Arnold, commander of the USAAF, had turned down both Love's 1940 proposal and that of the better-connected and more famous Cochran, despite the lobbying by Eleanor Roosevelt. But he essentially promised the command to Cochran, should such a force be needed in the future. While the U.S. was not yet fighting in World War II, Cochran had gone to England to volunteer to fly for the Air Transport Auxiliary. The ATA had been using female pilots since January 1940, and was starting to also train new pilots. The American women who flew in the ATA were the first American women to fly military aircraft. They flew to the Royal Air Force's frontline aircraft, Spitfires, Typhoons, Hudsons, Mitchells, Blenheims, Oxfords, Walruses, and Sea Otters, in non-combat roles, but in combat-like conditions. Most of these women served in the ATA during the war. Only 3 members returned to the U.S. to participate in the WASP program. The U.S. was building its air power and military presence in anticipation of direct involvement in the conflict, and had belatedly begun to drastically expand its men in uniform. This period led to the dramatic increase in activity for the U.S. Army Air Forces because of obvious gaps in manpower that could be filled by women. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, to compensate for the manpower demands of the military, the government encouraged women to enter the workforce to fill both industrial and service jobs supporting the war effort. To those most involved within the new ferrying division of the Air Transport Command, the numbers were painfully obvious. Colonel William H. Tunner was in charge of acquiring civilian ferry pilots. He decided to integrate his civilian force of female pilots into the AAF after speaking with Major Robert M. Love, ATC staff officer, and his wife Nancy. Convinced of the feasibility of the program by Mrs. Love, who had a commercial pilot license, he asked her to draw up a proposal, unaware that Arnold had shelved a similar proposal by Tunner's superior, Marge. Gen. Robert Olds. Cochrane had committed to go to Great Britain in March 1942 for the trial program of female pilots with the ITA. She used her association with the President and Mrs. Roosevelt to lobby Arnold to reject any plan that did not commission women, and set up an independent organization commanded by women. Ironically, Tunner's proposal called for commissioning women in the WAACs but was turned down after review by Arnold. WAFS. By the midsummer of 1942, Arnold was willing to consider the prior proposals seriously. Tunner and Love's plan was reviewed by the ATC headquarters and forwarded by Commander Gen. Harold L. George to Arnold, who was fully aware of it and gave it his blessing, after Mrs. Roosevelt had suggested a similar idea in a newspaper column. The Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron was headed by Mrs. Love, and went into operation on September 10, 1942. Soon, the Air Transport Command began using women to ferry planes from factory to airfields. WFTD. Cochrane returned to the United States on September 10, 1942, as the new organization was being publicized, and immediately confronted Arnold for an explanation. Arnold claimed ignorance and blamed the ATC staff, in particular George's Chief of Staff, Col. C.R. Smith. With the publicity involved, the WAFS program could not be reversed, and so on September 15, 1942, Cochrane's training proposal was also adopted. Cochrane and Love's squadrons were thereby established separately. The 319th Women's Flying Training Detachment at the Municipal Airport in Houston, Texas, with Cochrane as commanding officer, and the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, the 2nd Ferrying Group at Newcastle Army Air Base. Though rivals, the two programs and the respective leaders operated independently, and without acknowledgement of each other until the summer of 1943. When Cochrane pushed aggressively for a single entity to control the activity of all women pilots, Tunner, in particular, objected on the basis of differing qualification standards, and the absolute necessity of the ATC being able to control its own pilots. But Cochrane's preeminence with Arnold prevailed, and in July 1943 he ordered the programs merged, with Cochrane as director. The WAFS and the WFTD were combined to form the Women Airforce Service Pilots. Love continued with the program as executive in charge of WASP ferrying operations. Initial WASP training. The WASP training spanned 19 groups of women, the originals, or WAFS, led by Nancy Love, and the guinea pigs, Jacqueline Cochrane's first of 18 classes of women pilots. They were required to complete the same primary, basic, and advanced training courses as male Army Air Corps pilots, and many of them went on to specialized flight training. Of the two Chinese-American women in the WASP, Hazel Ying Lee and Maggie G, only one survived the war. Hazel Ying Lee died following a runway collision, but Maggie G survived. The only Native American woman in the WASP, Ola Mildred Rexroot, and Oglala Sioux woman from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota, also survived the war and later joined the Air Force. The WAFS each had an average of about 1,400 flying hours and a commercial pilot rating. They received 30 days of orientation to learn Army paperwork and to fly by military regulations. Afterward, they were assigned to various ferrying commands. The guinea pigs started training at the Houston Municipal Airport, now William P. Hobby Airport, on November 16, 1942, as part of the 319th Army Air Force Women's Flying Training Detachment. This was just after the WAFS had started their orientation in Wilmington, Delaware. Unlike the WAFS, the women that reported to Houston did not have uniforms uniforms and had to find their own lodging. The WFTDs also had minimal medical care, no life insurance, crash truck, or fire truck, and the ambulance was loaned from the Ellington Army Airfield, along with insufficient administrative staff, and a hodgepodge of aircraft, 23 types, for training. As late as January 1943, when the third class was about to start the training, the three classes were described by Bird Granger in On Final Approach as a raggle-taggle crowd in a rainbow of rumpled clothing, while they gathered for morning and evening colors. This lack of resources, combined with the foggy and wet Houston weather, delayed the graduation of the first class from February to April 1943. Conditions included the wet, sticky, clay soil everywhere, and a scarcity of restrooms, which made the potential for morale problems significant. To minimize this, the Finale Gazette was started. The first issue was published February 10, 1943. The female gremlin Finale was conceived by Roald Dahl and drawn by Walt Disney, and used as the official WASP mascot that appeared on the shoulder patches. The first Houston class started with 38 women with a minimum of 200 hours. 23 graduated on April 24, 1943, at the only Houston WASP graduation at Ellington Army Airfield. The second Houston class started in December 1942 with a minimum of 100 hours but finished the training just in time to move to Sweetwater, Texas, and become the first graduating class from Avenger Field on May 28, 1943. The third class completed their advanced training at Avenger Field and graduated July 3, 1943. Half of the fourth class of 76 women started the primary training in Houston on February 15, 1943, and then transferred to Sweetwater. On March 7, 1943, the Houston classes incurred the first fatality. Margaret Oldenburger, 43W4, and her instructor, Norris G. Morgan, crashed 7 miles south of Houston and were killed on impact. By the end of May 1943, the Houston 319th AAF WFTD was history. Later in the summer of 1943, both the WAFS and WFTD were combined into the WASP. Duties of the WASP. Each WASP had a pilot's license. They were trained to fly the Army way by the U.S. Army Air Forces at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas. More than 25,000 women applied for the WASP, and fewer than 1,900 were accepted. After completing 4 months of military flight training, 1,074 of them earned the wings and became the first women to fly American military aircraft. The women were not trained for combat. The course of instruction, however, was essentially the same as that for aviation cadets. The WASPs thus received no gunnery training, and very little formation flying and aerobatics, but went through the maneuvers necessary to be able to recover from any position. The percentage of trainees eliminated compared favorably with the elimination rates for male cadets in the Central Flying Training Command. After training, the WASP were stationed at 120 air bases across the U.S., assuming numerous flight-related missions, and relieving male pilots for combat duty. They flew 60 million miles of operational flights from aircraft factories to ports of embarkation and military training bases. They also towed targets for live anti-aircraft artillery practice, simulated strafing missions, and transported cargo. Women in these roles flew almost every type of aircraft flown by the USAAF during World War II. In addition, a few exceptionally qualified women were allowed to test rocket-propelled planes, to pilot jet-propelled planes, and to work with radar-controlled targets. Between September 1942 and December 1944, the WASP delivered 12,650 aircraft of 78 different types. 38 WASP flyers lost their lives while serving during the war, all in accidents. 11 died in training and 27 on active duty, because they were not considered military under the existing guidelines. A fallen WASP was sent home at family expense without traditional military honors, a note of heroism. The Army would not allow the U.S. flag to be placed on the coffin of the fallen WASP. Push for militarization. The WASP was considered civil service and did not receive military benefits, unlike the male counterparts. On the other hand, they were not administratively tied to the Army Air Forces and could resign at any time after completion of the training, although few, if any, did. On September 30, 1943, the first of the WASP militarization bills was introduced in the United States House of Representatives. Both Cochrane and Arnold desired a separate corps headed by a woman colonel. The War Department, however, consistently opposed such a move, since there was no separate corps for male pilots as distinguished from unrated AAF officers. Instead, it preferred that women be commissioned in the WAC and added to some 2,000 air WAC officers assigned to flying duty, legally permissible. On June 21, 1944, the House bill to give the WASP military status was narrowly defeated. The civilian male pilots lobbied against the bill, reacting to closure of some civilian flight training schools and the termination of 2 male pilot training commissioning programs. The House Committee on the Civil Service reported on June 5, 1944, that it considered the WASP unnecessary, unjustifiably expensive, and recommended that the recruiting and training of inexperienced women pilots be halted. Cochrane had been pushing for a resolution of the question, in effect, delivering an ultimatum to either commission the women or disband the program. The AAF had developed an excess of pilots and pilot candidates. As a result, Arnold ordered that the WASP be disbanded by December 20, 1944. Arnold is quoted from a speech he delivered at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas on December 7, 1944. The WASP has completed its mission. The job has been successful. But as is usual in war, the cost has been heavy. 38 WASP have died while helping the country move toward the moment of final victory. The Air Forces will long remember the service and the final sacrifice. At the conclusion of the WASP program, 915 women pilots were on duty with the AAF, 620 assigned to the Training Command, 141 to the Air Transport Command, 133 to the Numbered Air Forces in the continental United States, 11 to the Weather Wing, 9 to the Technical Commands and 1 to the Troop Carrier Command. Legacy. All records of the WASP were classified and sealed for 35 years, so the contributions to the war effort were little known and inaccessible to historians. In 1975, under the leadership of Col. Bruce Arnold, son of General Hap Arnold, the WASP fought the Battle of Congress in Washington, D.C., to have the WASP recognized as veterans of World War II. They organized as a group again and tried to gain public support for their official veteran recognition. Finally, in 1977, the records were unsealed after an Air Force press release erroneously stated the Air Force was training the first women to fly military aircraft for the U.S. This time, the WASPs lobbied Congress with the important support of Senator Barry Goldwater, who himself had been a World War II ferry pilot in the 27th Ferrying Squadron. President Jimmy Carter signed legislation P.L.95-202, Section 401, the G.I. Bill Improvement Act of 1977, providing that service as a WASP would be considered active duty for the purposes of programs administered by the Veterans Administration. In 1984, each WASP was awarded the World War II Victory Medal. Those who served for more than 1 year were also awarded American Theater Ribbon, American Campaign Medal for the service during the war. Many of the medals were accepted by the recipient's sons and daughters on the behalf, because of the pioneering and the expertise they demonstrated in successfully flying military aircraft. The WASP records showed that women pilots, when given the same training as men pilots, were as capable as men in non-combat flying. The 1977 legislation, either despite or because of its language, did not expressly allow WASPs to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. That was because Arlington National Cemetery, unlike most other national cemeteries, is administered by the Department of the Army, not the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Secretary of the Army determines eligibility for Arlington burial. The reason for the position taken by the Army on this issue may have been the rapidly diminishing space at Arlington, but in 2002, the Army reconsidered and decided that deceased WASPs were able to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. In 2015, however, the Army reinterpreted the law and its own regulations against the backdrop of 13 years of war, which once again threatened to deplete the cemetery of land. The Army ruled that the 1977 statute did not mandate the burial of deceased WASPs at Arlington. Legislation in 2016 seemingly overruled the Army's interpretation, and it was widely reported that WASPs could, again, be buried at Arlington. But the 2016 law revives the long-held concern about space. Thus, the legislation in the 114th Congress and H.R. 4336 by Wahida Mouthmixali, a retired Air Force fighter pilot, provides only for inurnment of cremated remains and not ground burial. On July 1, 2009, President Barack Obama and the United States Congress awarded the WASP the Congressional Gold Medal. 3 of the roughly 300 surviving WASPs were on hand to witness the event. During the ceremony, President Obama said, "The Women Airforce Service Pilots courageously answered the country's call in a time of need while blazing a trail for the brave women who have given and continue to give so much in service to this nation since. Every American should be grateful for the service, and I'm honored to sign this bill to finally give them some of the hard-earned recognition they deserve." On May 10, 2010, the 300 surviving WASPs came to the U.S. Capitol to accept the Congressional Gold Medal from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other congressional leaders. On New Year's Day in 2014, the Rose Parade had a float with 8 WASPs riding on it. Notable WASP aviators: Mildred Darlene Mickey Tuttle Axton, Anne Baumgartner Carl, Betty Tackerberry Blake. The last surviving member of the first WASP training group died April 9, 2015. Jean P. Dambley, member of the 43W5 class. Mary S. Reinerberg Burchard, class of 44W6. Pearl Lasker Chamberlain, first woman to solo a single-engine airplane up the Alaska Highway in 1946. Jacqueline Cochran, director of the WASP. In 1938, Cochran became famous nationwide for winning the Bendix Transcontinental Race. Violet Cowden, Rosa Charline Kreger, Nancy Bautsen-Cruz, Nancy Ruth Low-Crowd died January 21, 2016. Selma Cronin, Cornelia Fort, one of the original WAFS. Fort's experience included evading attacking IJNAF carrier planes at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. She became the first WAFS fatality in a mid-air collision while flying of BT-13 near Merkel, Texas on March 23, 1943. Maggie G., one of only 2 Asian Americans in the WASP, the other being Hazel Ying Lee, Betty Gillies, Lois Haley, Elaine D. Harmon, first WASP aviator interned at Arlington National Cemetery. Sarah Payne Hayden, Gloria Heath, Carla Horowitz, Celia Hunter, Marge Holbert. She was named to the board of directors of the Professional Race Pilots Association to represent the interests of female pilots and held the woman's international airspeed record at the time her death in July 1947. Marge died while performing as part of a flying circus that she joined to raise money to build a new racing airplane. Janet Hutchinson, of the Flying Hutchinsons, joined at age 18. Teresa James, Marguerite Ty Hughes Killen, Dorothy Swain Lewis worked at Piper Aircraft, Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, graduate of Phoebe Omley's Tennessee Bureau of Aeronautics Women Aviation Instructor Program in Nashville, Tennessee, instructed Navy pilots V-5 program classes 43F, W3G, W3H, instructed WASP classes 43W8, 44W2, 44W4, joined WASP in class 44W7 and AMP-5, towed targets in B-26 engineering flights. Various other aircraft, sculpted WASP trainee statue on United States Air Force Academy on Court, Colorado Springs, painted official portrait of Janet Reno for U.S. Department of Justice. Hazel Ying Lee, one of 2 Asian Americans in the WASP, the other being Maggie G. Barbara Erickson London, the only WASP member to be awarded the Air Medal during World War II. Following the war, medals were awarded to other WASP members. Nancy Love, Annabelle Craft Moss flew the At-6 trainer and was responsible for transporting officers from base to base. Ann Noggle, following the war she became a noted photographer and writer. She took the photos for God, Country and the Thrill of It. Women Air Force Pilots of World War II, with an introduction by Dora Docherty Strother. Deanie Bishop Parish, Suzanne Upjohn Delano Parish, co-founder of Kalamazoo Air Museum. Vilma Lazar Qualls, a member of Class 43W3, she was assigned to Long Beach Army Air Base after training. She flew BT-13, C-47, B-17 and B-24. Mabel Rawlinson, Florence Schutze Reynolds, earned her pilot's license in 1941, just before women were barred from the government-operated training program at local airports due to the expected need of more male pilots. Following the death of her husband around 1988, she took over the WASP organization's stores job, making and selling intricate silver and bronze jewelry, banners, scarves and other WASP-themed items. Ola Mildred Rexroot and Oglala Sioux from Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota, was the only Native American woman in the WASP. Margaret Ringenberg, Dawn Roach Seymour, Evelyn Sharp. In 1938, Evelyn Sharp was the youngest person in the United States to receive a commercial pilot license. Gertrude Tompkins Silver, the last WASP to go missing in World War II. She made a flight from Mines Field to Palm Springs on October 26, 1944, intending to fly a P-51 Mustang on to New Jersey, but never arrived in Palm Springs. As of January 2010, search efforts to locate the crash site are still ongoing. Jane Strawn, graduate of Class 43W1. Elizabeth Strophis flew B-26 Widowmakers and pulled 6Gs in the F-16 at age 72. She died at 96 on March 6, 2016 in Faribault, MN. Dora Docherty Strother, Mary E. Williamston, Guinea Wood.